I don't know. There were, I mean, in the old days, there's certainly a lot
Thanks,
of...
get your stuff and get out.
Yeah, right. There's the door, yes. There's a line outside, by the way. They're waiting, please, lady. No, I mean, I had a lot of good...
Bon Jovi rose to global fame with electrifying performances, timeless rock anthems, and the unmistakable chemistry between frontman Jon Bon Jovi and lead guitarist Richie Sambora. Together, they crafted hits that defined a generation, touring the world and captivating millions with their energy and passion. Each member played a vital role in shaping the band's identity, but none more so than Richie, whose guitar riffs and harmonies were central to their signature sound. But everything changed when Richie suddenly walked away, and what he has since revealed about Jon Bon Jovi is leaving fans in shock before sold-out stadiums and platinum records. Richie Sambora was just a kid from Woodbridge Township, New Jersey. Born on July 11, 1959, he grew up in a working-class home with parents who instilled a strong work ethic in him and supported his early musical curiosity. He started with the accordion at age 6, but that didn't last long. It wasn't until he saw a performance by Jimi Hendrix that something clicked. Richie decided he wanted to play guitar, and by the time he was a teenager, he was already mimicking blues and rock riffs in his bedroom. His influences ranged from Eric Clapton to Jimmy Page, and you could hear echoes of them in his playing. Later on, Richie had a natural sense of melody and emotion that made even simple chords sound rich. He wasn't interested in just showing off technically. He was after something more soulful. That desire would guide him in the years to come. He played in several local bands during his teens and early 20s. Most notably, Message, a New Jersey band that gained a small but passionate following. With Message, Richie got a taste of life on the road, sleeping in vans and playing club after club. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and it made him appreciate music not just as a career, but as a lifeline. In the early 80s, Richie also got involved in session work, briefly traveling to Los Angeles to try and break into the scene. He auditioned for Kiss when Ace Frehley left the band, a fact many fans don't know, but he wasn't chosen. Still, that moment proved how serious he was, and how close he was to something bigger. That break came in 1983. Word got around that a young local band named Bon Jovi was looking for a new guitarist. The band had just recorded a demo for Runaway, and the track was getting airplay in the New York area. Richie attended one of their early shows and saw potential in the group, but also saw something missing. He introduced himself backstage and offered to audition. After one rehearsal, Jon Bon Jovi knew they had their guy. Richie wasn't just another guitarist. He brought a depth of musical knowledge and chemistry that elevated the entire group. From that moment on, Richie and Jon became the core of the Bon Jovi sound. But Richie didn't come in as a sideman. He came in as a creative equal. He quickly established himself as a curator, contributing to the band's biggest songs. His bluesy, expressive playing gave the band its emotional weight, and his harmonies with Jon became a trademark. Richie could sing just as well as he could play, and fans noticed. Still, even in those early days, the dynamic between Richie and Jon was clear. Jon was the face, the business mind, and the leader. Richie was the heart, the soul of the sound, the guy who connected with fans on a personal level. It worked for years. It worked beautifully, but that balance would one day shift. Richie once said in an old interview that he never expected stardom to happen the way it did. Back then, no one knew where the journey would lead. But for Richie, the road had finally opened up, and it was just the beginning. When Richie joined Bon Jovi in 1983, he wasn't just filling a spot. He was helping shape a sound that would define rock in the late 80s and early 90s. His arrival marked a turning point. While Jon had the charisma, ambition, and the beginnings of a band, it was Richie who added musical, emotional, and creative depth. From the start, their chemistry was natural. John had a sharp sense of melody and structure, but Richie brought a blues-rooted musicality that gave the songs grit and soul. It didn't take long for them to start writing together. One of their first collaborations was You Give Love a Bad Name, a song that would go on to top the charts and become one of the band's signature hits. And it was just the beginning. Together, Richie and John crafted some of the most iconic tracks of their era. Living on a Prayer, Wanted Dead or Alive, and Bad Medicine all carried Richie's signature style. His guitar solos were never just technical. They told stories. His backing vocals, often blending tightly with John's lead, created harmonies that became instantly recognizable. Beyond the hits, there was a creative balance at play. John was the driver, always pushing forward with big ideas and business instincts. Richie was the emotional counterweight, focused on feeling, nuance, and keeping the music grounded. This contrast was key to their success. Fans weren't just connecting with one frontman. They were connecting with a partnership. The band's third album, Slippery When Wet, launched them into superstardom. It sold over 28 million copies worldwide and turned Bon Jovi into a household name. But behind the scenes, Richie was taking on more than just a guitarist's role. He was involved in song structure, vocal arrangements, and even production suggestions. His influence was all over the record, even if John got most of the public spotlight. Richie never seemed to mind that much. In interviews at the time, he often spoke about the magic of collaboration. There was mutual respect, and they were different people, but that difference is what made it work. They followed up with New Jersey, another massive hit. Tracks like I'll Be There For You and Born to Be My Baby showcased more of Richie's songwriting sensibility. He had a way of slipping emotion into big rock anthems without making them feel forced, and fans noticed. By now, Richie wasn't just John's guitarist. He was a fan favorite in his own right. His look, his smile, his solos, he had become part of the band's identity. But the music industry was changing. In the early 90s, the grunge movement started shifting the landscape. Bon Jovi adapted with albums like Keep the Faith, which introduced a more mature, grounded sound. Richie played a big role in that transition. His playing became even more refined, and his songwriting took on deeper themes. Meanwhile, Richie was also carving out a solo career. In 1991, he released Stranger in This Town, a bluesy, introspective record that gave fans a different side of him. It wasn't a massive commercial success, but it earned critical praise and showed that Richie had a voice of his own, both literally and creatively. Throughout the 90s and 2000s, the Richie-John partnership continued to thrive publicly. Albums like These Days, Crush, and Bounce featured more collaborative songwriting and reinforced their status as a creative duo. On stage, their chemistry remained strong. Richie would often walk up beside John mid-song, grinning during solos and trading lines during acoustic sets. It all felt natural. Still, by the mid-2000s, the tone began to shift. The band's direction leaned more toward polished, radio-friendly pop. Richie adjusted, but it was clear the rawness of their earlier years was fading. John had taken on more of the creative steering, and Richie seemed to be stepping back, visibly but quietly. His solo voice, once encouraged, was now being heard less and less. Even so, their friendship seemed intact, or at least on the surface. They had known each other for decades, after all. To fans, Richie and John still looked like a team. The hits kept coming, and the tours remained successful. But creatively, something was changing. Richie had always been more than just the guitarist, but over time, that role felt narrower. The creative bond that had once felt unbreakable was starting to fray. On the surface, Bon Jovi's world was filled with sold-out arenas, private jets, and non-stop applause. But behind all that shine was a machine that never stopped moving. A machine that required constant energy, time, and emotional sacrifice. For Richie, the work was rewarding, but it was also exhausting. As the years rolled on, the band's pace didn't slow. Album tour, album tour. The rhythm became relentless. From the outside, it looked like success, but from the inside, it often felt like survival. Richie, always known for his laid-back personality, started to show signs of wear. He wasn't just playing shows. He was juggling personal challenges, growing creative pressures, and the quiet weight of being expected to always show up smiling. Studio time was particularly intense. While the public loved the polished sound of Bon Jovi's hits, that polish came at a cost. Richie and John would sometimes spend hours on a single verse, going back and forth on lyrics, melodies, and tone. John was known for being a perfectionist, and Richie had to match that energy whether he felt like it or not. Still, the results spoke for themselves. Albums like Crush and Have a Nice Day topped charts, and songs, particularly It's My Life, brought Bon Jovi to a whole new generation. But every success came with longer tours, more media obligations, and less time for rest. Richie loved performing, but he also valued balance, something that was becoming harder to find. Then there were the unspoken expectations. John had taken on more control as the years went by, not just over the music, but over the image, the decisions, and even the direction of the brand. Richie was a co-writer and co-creator, but it was clear who was steering the ship. John had the final word. It wasn't a hostile environment, but it was rigid. Behind the curtain, Richie's personal life was shifting too. He was raising a daughter and trying to stay present despite constantly being on the road. The loss of his father in 2006 had hit him hard. And like many rock musicians of his generation, Richie had struggled with substance use, a battle he fought quietly and without seeking attention. It was all starting to add up. Still, he showed up every time. Whether it was a massive festival in Europe or a press event in Tokyo, Richie was there with his guitar and his grin. But those who knew him closely said there was a growing distance in his eyes. The fire hadn't gone out, but it was flickering. The band's 2010 Circle Tour was one of their biggest ever, grossing over $200 million. They were still at the top of their game in terms of performance, but Richie seemed more subdued. He still played the solos with precision, still sang the harmonies, but his stage presence was quieter, more introspective. Fans began to notice the change, even if they couldn't quite name it. Richie wasn't as front and center during interviews. His solo moments were trimmed. His songwriting credits, once plentiful, started appearing less frequently on new records. Tensions may have been building, but no public words were exchanged. Richie remained loyal to the band. He wasn't out to start drama. He had too much history. With John, too much respect for what they'd built together. But privately, a line was starting to form between the band's needs and his own. It happened quickly. One moment Richie was part of the Bon Jovi engine on stage in rehearsals and listed on the tour roster, and the next, he was gone. In April 2013, fans were waiting for Bon Jovi to take the stage in Calgary, Canada. But just before the lights went down, a sudden announcement rippled through the crowd. Richie wouldn't be performing. No reason was given. No official statement followed, just a note on the band's website saying that Richie was absent due to personal issues. That was it. The reaction was instant. Fans flooded forums, Twitter, and fan pages. Where was Richie? Was he okay? Would he be back? At the time, the silence around his absence only fueled the confusion. John addressed it in an interview soon after, but vaguely. His tone was calm but distant. John emphasized that the band would continue. There were shows to play, tickets sold, and commitments to honor. and so they moved forward without Richie. That decision, more than the absence itself, felt like a break not just to fans, but to those who had followed Richie's journey from the beginning. This wasn't just a missing band member. This was the co-writer of their biggest songs, the voice behind the harmonies, the emotional anchor of the group. And he had disappeared with no fanfare, no tribute, no warning. Tour dates came and went. Richie remained silent. He wasn't spotted backstage. He didn't post anything on social media. He didn't issue a statement. For a long time, he simply vanished from the Bon Jovi universe. For many fans, this was especially hard to accept because of how much Richie had meant to the band, not just musically, but personally. He had always been the one who waved back from the stage, who laughed in interviews, who signed autographs a little longer. He wasn't just a lead guitarist. He was part of the emotional identity of Bon Jovi. And yet, John continued the tour with session musicians filling Richie's spot. Lead guitar duties were handed over to Phil X, a skilled and respected player in his own right, but someone who could never fully replace Richie's presence. The shows went on. The set list stayed mostly the same, but something was different. The spark, the dynamic, the unique chemistry between Richie and John was missing. Still, no one inside the band said much. John made a few remarks to the press that hinted at a deeper story, but nothing was ever confirmed. The media speculated heavily. Some said Richie had relapsed into old personal habits. Others claimed there were family issues or creative disagreements. Behind closed doors, but without confirmation, it was all guesswork. Richie kept his head down. He stayed quiet. Later that year, he began to appear at small charity events and low-key performances. He played a few shows in Los Angeles, worked on solo material, and spent more time with his daughter. Occasionally, he was asked about Bon Jovi, but his answers were always measured. Behind the calm, though, was a clear break. Richie was no longer part of the touring lineup. He didn't contribute to the band's next full-length albums. The official Bon Jovi website quietly removed his name from current material. The silence between him and John stretched on. In time, Richie found his footing outside of Bon Jovi. He collaborated with Australian guitarist Orianthi, performed on late-night shows, and spoke more openly about his passion for music. But even as he moved forward, the questions lingered. As years passed, those questions remained unanswered until Richie began talking. For years after he quietly stepped away from Bon Jovi, Richie remained mostly silent about what really happened. There were hints, subtle comments in interviews, but nothing direct. Then slowly, he began to open up. It didn't happen in one moment. There was no tell-all interview or angry outburst. Instead, Richie spoke with calm honesty in bits and pieces, in a way that seemed less about blame and more about perspective. And what he shared painted a different picture of the band's inner world, one far more complex than the polished image fans were used to. According to a leaked conversation with a close friend, Richie was asked about his departure. Instead of repeating the usual line about personal reasons, he paused, then answered with something unexpected. "I had to look out for myself. It got toxic." He was kind of disgusting about it. Sometimes people change when money and power get involved. It stopped being about music. It started being about control. So what finally pushed him away wasn't one dramatic event, but a slow erosion of creative respect. Over time, decisions were being made without him. Set lists were being finalized before he had a say. New songs were recorded and polished in the studio with less input from the man who had once co-written the band's biggest hits. The phrase toxic didn't refer to anything scandalous. It wasn't about behavior in the typical sense. It was about how Richie felt reduced to a sideman in a band he had helped build. It was about being dismissed in meetings, ignored in the writing room, and treated like an employee instead of a partner. To fans who had followed Bon Jovi for decades, this side of the story was eye-opening. Richie had always seemed like John's equal on stage, smiling, playing, and singing in harmony. But behind the curtain, he was beginning to feel more like a hired hand, and he couldn't accept that. Richie's frustration also stemmed from the changing tone of the band itself. In earlier years, their music was built on authenticity songs about struggle, love, and small-town life. But as John took tighter control of the creative process, Richie felt the music losing its soul. The final straw, according to some sources, came during the lead-up to the Because We Can tour. Richie expressed concerns about the setlist, the tour schedule, and his own role in the show. He wanted more say, and John wanted more control. There was no shouting match, no big argument, just a moment where Richie realized he'd had enough. And so he walked. When Richie finally began talking about it years later, it wasn't to hurt John. In fact, he still referred to him as a brother in some ways. Fans reacted in all kinds of ways. Some supported Richie, saying it made sense given how he had disappeared so suddenly and without ceremony. Others defended John, pointing to his leadership and the fact that the band had continued successfully without Richie. But most agreed on one thing: the split hadn't been as simple as it once seemed. After Richie spoke out, there wasn't a dramatic media storm, no public feud, no war of words between him and John. Instead, there was silence, followed by a sense of understanding. Richie wasn't trying to settle a score. He was just explaining why he stepped away from something millions thought he'd never leave. In the years that followed, Richie found new ground. He began collaborating with Orianthi. Together, they released music under the name RSO. Their project was different from the arena rock sound he'd been known for. It was personal, stripped back, and built on chemistry. It didn't top the charts, but that wasn't the point. For Richie, it was about playing again, writing again, being creative without limitations. He also leaned into his role as a father. His daughter had been a big part of his decision to leave the band. Touring with Bon Jovi meant being gone for months at a time. Richie wanted to be there for her for school events, birthdays, and real-life moments. He had missed too many already. Now he was present. At the same time, the door to Bon Jovi never seemed fully closed. Over the years, questions about a reunion continued to surface in interviews, on fan forums, and even at major award shows. People wanted to know if Richie would ever return. In 2018, that moment almost came. Bon Jovi was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and for the first time since his departure, Richie joined the band on stage. It wasn't a full reunion, but it was enough to remind fans of what once was. He played, he smiled, he stood beside John, and for a moment, it felt like the old days. After the show, Richie gave a few interviews. "It was a good night," he said. "I'm happy we got to do it together." But when asked if that meant a return to the band, he was clear. "I'm not saying never, but it would have to be different." That word, different, carried weight. It meant more than a new contract or a limited tour. It meant respect, creative, space, and balance. Richie had walked away from the band because he felt his voice was being silenced. Coming back would only make sense if things changed. And from the outside, there was no sign that they had. John, for his part, kept the band moving forward. Bon Jovi released new music, adapted to a changing industry, and continued touring. But without Richie, something was missing. Even longtime fans said it. The chemistry, the edge, the emotional layer Richie had always brought couldn't be replaced. Phil X, who took over lead guitar duties, handled the role with professionalism and skill. But he wasn't Richie, and no one expected him to be. The dynamic that John and Richie had built over 3 decades was too unique, too personal. For Richie, the bond was still there, but the terms had changed. He wasn't angry, he wasn't bitter, but he was clear about where he stood. Whether they will ever reunite remains unknown, but one thing is clear: Richie doesn't need the spotlight to be fulfilled. He's living life on his terms, playing music when he wants and speaking up when it matters. He walked away not because he stopped caring, but because he cared enough to start over. Should Richie have left earlier? Let us know what you think. Want? To see more like it, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell to get notifications for new videos. We appreciate your support and look forward to sharing more insights with you. Thanks for watching.